There was a massive announcement that came down it's going to change the real estate business forever. And that had to do with the NAR settlement that came down. And NAR stands for National Association of Realtors. They're the trade group that represents nationwide those that want to be called realtors. They belong to this organization. And over the years have been advocates for the real estate industry. And some people are kind of mad at them for this, but they're trying to protect the general real estate companies, MLSs, and all of that throughout the nation. They have, I believe it's 1.8 million members nationwide. And so this settlement came down just this last Friday. The agreement has happened. It probably will get ratified because it's supposed to take place mid-July of this year. So starting this year, it's going to be a drastic difference in how things are done. So leading up to this, really, if you think about it, when you go to buy a car or you buy a house, you buy a suit, shoes at the mall or whatever, the cost of doing business has been built into the price of that. And that's been the same with the real estate industry, where the compensation and service fees for the realtors, both the buyer and the seller's agent, have been built into the price of the house that the buyer pays for, by the way. No sellers wrote checks for that. It got funded by the buyers. And then out of that, the cost of doing business, the realtors got paid for that. And so the NAR settlement has come down. And so let's go through this. It could change a little bit, but this is basically the main factors of that. So we're going to cover what is it and what it does and what it means to the buyers and sellers. And by the way, I'm with First Team Real Estate. I serve the Orange County market areas for both buyers, sellers, and a little bit of property management. So I've gone through many different things over 22 years and getting different negotiating expert designations, the Graduate of Realtor Institute. So I'm a professional. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm with coaching. So we get our ability to learn how to negotiate, learn how to run a business, learn how to do that all through the coaching with Buffini and Company. And I work my business primarily by working by referral. So people like yourself that are generous enough to be able to refer your friends and family to me. So what's the lawsuit all about? So basically, a few years back, the National Association of Realtors faced multiple lawsuits over the way that the agent commissions are set. In late October, a federal jury in Missouri found that the National Association of Realtors and several large real estate brokerages, they accused saying they conspired to require that home sellers pay the buyer's agent commissions, and they say it was in violation of federal antitrust laws. So in doing that, they challenged the way that things were done. And again, anywhere you go and whatever you buy, the cost of business for that seller of whatever the good is, whether it's a car, a suit, a shoe, whatever, it's all built into that. And so now what they're trying to do is break that apart and separate it. So the settlement says that the NAR, which is representative of all of these brokerages nationwide, would agree not to create rules that allow listing agents to set compensation for buyer's broker. So what that means is that no longer, number two, they're going to be allowed to publish in the multiple listing service what their offer of compensation would be to a buyer's agent. And then the offer of compensation could continue to be offered by a seller, which I think would be a smart idea, but they would have to pursue that off the MLS through negotiation and consultation with a realtor professional. So what that's going to look like are, agents calling up a seller's agent and saying, hey, is a seller willing to pay any buyer broker compensation? And if so, what is that? So what they wanted to do is they want this to be off the publication. And I can see the benefit of that because agents, sometimes they're not allowed to do this, but they will do this. It's human nature. But if somebody was offering only 0.5%, that they could potentially steer that client away from that property because of compensation. And that's not allowed. It's against the realtor ethics code and the whole bit. But that's why they're doing this. They're separating it off. Number four, the sellers can offer that buyer concession. So they're going to create a new field or a new way to communicate what the seller is willing to do. And they're going to just call it concession. So for example, they might say, hey, I'm willing to do up to 3% or designated as 3% for buyer's concession towards their buyer's closing costs. And one of the caveats to that is that they're not allowed to designate that towards the buyer's agent's compensation or service fee. So they can say, hey, we're going to give you $25,000 to contribute towards the buyer's closing costs. Part of that buyer's closing costs is going to be hiring their real estate professional. So NAR's agreed to now require though, and this is a huge one here, NAR's now going to require MLS participants working with buyers to enter into a written representation agreement. It's called a BRBC, Buyer's Representative Buyer Cooperating Compensation Agreement. And so this was always advocated before, but now it's going to be required. So before someone can show a property, they're required to sit down with that buyer and go through an agency, go through a cooperating broker compensation, this BRBC, to be able to talk to them about representing them, about hiring them, the benefits of working with a realtor. They're just like in the listing presentation, when Jim sat down with their agents, they presented everything about like, here's what we're going to do to sell your house. Here's what we're going to do to market it. Here's what we're going to do for you and all the navigating parts that goes through a transaction. Well, now the buyer's agents are going to have to get a presentation together, and most of the time they've done that before, but it's been kind of loosey-goosey. Now it's going to be a very much professional presentation of the benefits of working with a realtor to represent their interests, because prior to this, agents that are representing buyers have been a sub-agent of the seller, okay, until they write that offer and represent the buyer. They separate themselves from being a sub-agent of the seller to representing the buyer. So now they're saying you've got to do that upfront before you can even show the property. So in other words, the buyers have to now hire a buyer's agent. And so all these changes, so not being allowed to, put it out on the MLS, what a seller is willing to do, and then the buyers having to hire a buyer's agent, those things are all going to take effect mid-July. And so that's what's been happening. So if you listen to the news, and this is the thing that's upsetting most of the industry professionals, is that if you listen to CNN and MSNBC and the whole bit, they're trashing real estate agents and the profession of being in real estate, and making it seem like we're greedy and we're just charging and we're taking advantage, even though it's always been in the contracts, at least in California, and that's where I'm licensed, that's where the contracts I know, it's always been negotiable. The sellers have always chosen whether or not they want to offer and how much they want to offer to a buyer's agent. A seller had a choice, hey, I want to sell this on my own. I want to hire a broker that does it for a set fee and list it in the MLS, and then choose whether or not to work with buyers. There's listings on the multiple listing service today that say, hey, we're offering $500 for compensation to a buyer's broker. And what they're saying is that we really don't want to work with a buyer's agent. And so it's almost the same as what a sell yourself type thing or help you sell is at. So there's always been that opportunity for a seller to choose, but agents are now going to have to really get good at being able to explain the benefits, and then negotiate out the compensation that they have for the listing part. And then the buyers are now going to be required to sit down with an agent, and that agent is going to go through, and they are going to have to hire that agent that represents them to buy a property, and they're going to have to hash out how much the buyer is now going to be responsible for paying that agent. So if it's 2.5%, now the buyers are going to have a new closing costs to do it. They're going to have their own agent that they have to be responsible to pay. Now, that being said, agents are still, like myself, I'm still going to negotiate with the seller to cover that cost. And so that the buyer's agent is going to change forever. They're going to have to get really good at the negotiation and being able to ask the seller on behalf of the buyer. So you have this agreement with the buyer that, hey, I work for 2.5, that's my service fee. I'm going to do all these things for you, and this is why you should hire me. And when they hire you for that, 2.5%, whatever you can negotiate, then you're going to go back to the seller on their behalf, and you're going to ask them in the offer, because before you could not, up to late 2022, you could not negotiate the seller's compensation of commission. You couldn't do that. But now, starting in 2023, unbeknownst to many people, they have started to allow you to be able to ask the seller to pay. So if they were only offering that $500, you could, in your offer now, present to them what your buyer's agreement is. I work for 2.5%, and you're presenting that to them, and you're asking them to pay for it. Now they could come back and say, no, I'm not going to pay for that. And then the buyer can say, well, then I'm not going to buy your house. So it becomes this negotiation, and that's the purpose, that they're stripping that away from the seller's automatic, closing costs in the transaction, which I would argue with you that it was always paid for by the buyer in the price of the home, but that's a different story. So, and that's what I said in here, that the sellers, if you ask the seller today that's been listening to the news, they think that they no longer have to pay the buyer's compensation. And that's always been the case, but then they could lose out on being able to have a qualified buyer be a part of that. So, but the problem is that no sellers are ever written a check. It's always been a funding of the bank loan and the buyer's funds that gives them the money to then pay their costs. And so that's the same with buying a car, Nordstrom's, Trader Joe's, everything else. It's always been built into the price, but that's now changed. The problems and challenges that we see is that, honestly, how can a buyer afford the down payment, the closing costs for the loan, and also to pay the cost of hiring their own agent? Most buyers that I work with, especially first-time buyers, if they're not paying cash, they have to finance everything. Okay. And so they have scratched together for as long as they can, or grandmother's helping them, or somebody's helping them to barely come up with a 10%, 15%, 5%, whatever they can come up with, and the closing cost of the loan, and title and escrow and the things that they have to pay for. Those things are there. Now they're asking them to come up with an additional, 2 to 3%, which, in my case, there's cost of doing business, right? So in order for me to represent a buyer, I have overhead, I have licensing, insurance, all of these costs, and I have to pay my own taxes, and I have to get the broker gets their cut, all this kind of stuff. So there's an expense to be in business. So what the challenges are going to be going forward is that there's going to be a decent amount of realtors that are going to be like, I only sell like 3 or 4 homes a year. How can I possibly afford all of these things and represent a buyer? So they're going to bow out. So that's going to create some challenges. But this first one is a buyer challenge. Most of them do not have the money to do this. Number 2, the sellers, if they're not offering compensation to the agent, it's going to reduce their buyer pool. They're shooting themselves in the foot, in my opinion. If you're not offering and they can't afford, then you're going to say, okay, Mr. Buyer, Mrs. Buyer, we are not going to help you out with this. You're on your own, and they're just going to simply go away because they can't afford to do it. Then you're going to reduce the amount of people that buy your home. And I would submit to you that if you're priced under 900,000, like townhomes, condos, and things like that are, 95% of the buyers in that particular segment, they're first-time buyers or buyers that are buying something that's affordable. And so they don't have the money to be able to do this. And so they're just simply going to go away. And it's going to reduce the number of buyers that make offers. And with lower buyer offers, that's when pricing goes down. I'm not saying pricing is going to go down because we don't have a lot of supply. But if you were used to getting 5, 6, 7 offers and 90% of them go away because you're not going to offer a compensation to a buyer's agent that they can't afford to do on their own, you just took away 90% of your offers. And now you're only going to get one offer. And as a listing agent, I represent a lot of sellers. Our number one goal is to get multiple offers so that we can negotiate the highest and best price. But if I only have one offer to negotiate with, and I try to go higher in price and they say, nope, I'm good where I'm at, you're going to get a lower price than what you could have. And so I think that this is a really big factor that sellers need to consider before they say, I'm not offering any. But if you listen to the news, they're like, I don't have to pay a buyer's compensation, which has always been their choice not to do. It's just a foolish thing to do. So number 3, current lenders, they don't have the opportunity to finance closing costs wrapped up into the loan. That's just not an option for them to be able to do. So that is probably one of the things that is going to have to try to change in order to do that. If you buy a car, you can finance those closing costs. If you buy some other things, you can finance those types of things. But currently in the housing market, unless John has a product to do that, I'm not aware of that. The 4th thing is that with government loans like FHA and VA, they have restrictions on the amount that can be contributed to them by their agents or costs that they have to pay for themselves. And so in particular, VA, they do not allow a VA buyer to pay for any closing costs in that way. So those are definitely some challenges there. So if you have any questions, I would love to be able to kind of see what I can do about answering them at this point.
Looks like Robert Slater has a question.
Yeah, Mike, when I started years and years ago, all my clients were first-time buyers, 3% down. It was hard to get that money to put down. Now you're asking that first-time buyer to do that? That's not going to happen. So something else has got to change to adjust that, because you as you said, you are getting rid of the first-time buyer. They just cannot do that unless something changes and they're allowed, the sellers allowed to pay those. But that's sad in the state. But things change, and we'll get around to get that better. But right now it's chaos. Thanks for your presentation.
You're welcome.
Like,
Is this a law in every state or just California?
This is nationwide.
Okay, thanks.
John Schrum.
Thank you so much, NAR. Greatly appreciate it. Hey, Mike. So quick question for you. So to clarify, so the listing side, right? So the sellers can still say, hey, we're going to go ahead and cover that buyer's commission, but it's going to have to show as a closing cost credit in so many cases, right? It's still, or can they still say, yes, we'll cover the buyer agent commission outside of any type of loan financing?
Yeah. So here's what I would say, that the answer is yes, you can absolutely still do that. And it goes down as a buyer's agent compensation, but the paperwork is going to be different. So if I'm a seller today in today's market, I want to limit the amount of cost, because now that the buyer's is going to be reduced in this, guess what? If you only have one offer and that agent is saying, I want 4%, my offer, I'm the only offer you have, and I want 4%, you're not going to have any choice. So if I'm a seller today, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to offer as a strategy. And that's what we're talking to sellers about is, if you think about it, don't look at it as a cost, look at it as a strategy. If you're only offering $500, how many people are going to be excited about selling your home? But if you're offering 4% on the other end, there's not an agent in Southern California that's not going to be racking their brain trying to figure out, how can I sell this house? Because they're incentivized to do so. All right, that's human nature. So if I'm a seller today, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to go ahead and agree to do a 2.5% or even a 3% compensation to a buyer's agent, and I'm going to make sure that they know about it so that they don't come back and ask me to pay for a higher one. And then on the buyer's side, when you sit down with that BRBC and you say, okay, John, I'm going to represent you, and here's all the things I'm going to do for you in negotiation and the value that I bring to representing you. And that's going to be 95% of my presentation with them about the market and about all of the things and about price, style, location, all those things. And then the last part of it is going to be, and you're wondering how I get paid. And I'm going to tell this story. It used to be this way, and now it's this way. So we're going to sign a BRBC. I'm going to represent you for making offers on the properties you want to. And my fee for you is 3%. Okay. But I'm going to go back to the seller and negotiate hard for you to have that 3% covered. Okay. Yep. And you give yourself a little leeway. The sellers can come back and say, no way, the NAR settlement. And you go back and forth. and you come up with 2.5%, I can modify my agreement with you, John. If I'm willing to knock it down to 2.5%, then I'm gonna modify that agreement, that BRBC, and then off we go. We're going to figure this out. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's something that's been offered for years.
Yes,
We've always
absolutely.
100%. So thanks, Mike.
I see Larry Larson.
Larry, you're muted.
All right, we'll go to Robert then.
Yeah, Mike.
Sorry, I'm challenged again,
Okay.
guys. The way I see this is kind of diluting the, or is there a reason for the buyer to still use a full disclosure? I bought my house without a buying agent.
Mhm.
I bought it direct with a selling agent. So I found the house and that's what I did. But seems to me this is going to dilute the buying agent. What's to stop someone from just going out and being a buying consultant and not having a license and the overhead on the MLS and all of that for your guys' industry? You follow what I'm asking?
Yeah, well, in the state of California, I can only speak to that, but Mark will tell you, you have to have a license to conduct real estate. So unless you're buying it for yourself, and you've always had that opportunity to, buy and sell property, if you're capable of doing that and you don't see the value in having somebody look out for your best interests, you don't know what you don't know, Larry. So, there's a reason that agents represent buyers and you have attorneys that don't represent themselves. So doctors don't do surgery on themselves. Dr. Mark doesn't do his own dentistry. So there's a value. Well, I mean, if you're flossing your teeth, Dr. Mark, and you can fix something in the front, but you're not doing oral surgery on yourself. So there's a benefit.
I understand the reason for using a licensed one, but what I'm asking is the change in the law gonna allow people who are not licensed to go out and help the buyers search and find what they're looking for? Because there's so much information available to the buyers now that used to be controlled by the industry. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying. And I'm not an attorney, so I don't know. But my guess is that in order to do contracts and there's a reason that I tell people I'm not allowed to give you financial advice or tax advice, is because I'm not licensed to do that. And I don't think
the answer is no.
Pardon?
The short answer is no, Larry.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's not.
If people go out unlicensed and do this, they're going to get in big trouble.
Yeah, there's benefits to that. And that's honestly the biggest change that's going to happen on the buyer side. Buyers agents like myself and others, I do both listings and buyers, is that you're going to have to get really good at articulating your value. Otherwise the buyers, they're just going to be like, why should I work with you? And they're going to interview people like listing people do. They interview 2 or 3 agents sometimes, and they say, okay, I'm going to pick, Mike Raines because I like Mike Raines's value proposition. And so the buyers that get referred to me, I'm going to show them and demonstrate my value as to why they should be working with me. Jordan, I see your hand.
Yeah, Mike, great presentation. Lots of information. Thank you very much for putting it on. My question is ultimately, how are we going to help you with this transition, right? Are you segmenting more to property management for consistent revenue, or are you going after just more volume? What is your strategy to negotiate this?
Well, I happen to believe that I think that there's going to be a fair number of realtors that get out of the business because of this, and I have an opportunity to increase my market share. Listen, I love what I do. I love representing buyers. I love representing sellers. I do property management, but I am not scared of this. I'm not cowering away from this. I think it's just something different, and we're gonna adapt. But honestly, I'm kind of excited because I think it's gonna make me a better agent, because I'm gonna do the education. I'm gonna get the scripts, and it's all in how you talk about it. The fact is that buyers need representation. And this is going to force us to be able to be better at articulating why they need a realtor. And then when you do sign it, and Mark will probably agree to this, but I think the day's coming soon where you're not in California, maybe even nationwide, going to be allowed to represent both the buyer and the seller, because how can you have a fiduciary responsibility to a seller and have a fiduciary responsibility to a buyer at the same time?
I agree.
So I shy away from it as much as I can. There's times when it happens, but it's a very uncomfortable situation because you're always dancing on a fine line.
Okay, guys,
It's an inherent conflict.
allow for,
Take it out of it.
let's do 4 more questions if we have them. We're getting close to the end here. Robert, question.
Mike, this could be a great opportunity for your realtors. You know, all the time I talk to realtor friends, you know, I showed this guy so many damn properties, he went with someone else. Now, when you sign an agreement with a buying person, you're the only one that can sign that, or can they sign many of them?
That's a good question. And, you know, that's going to be one of the questions that I'm going to ask a buyer is, have you signed one? And I want to take a look at it because there's 2 options in there. There's an exclusive option where I'm going to be exclusively representing you for any property. And then there's one that says, hey, it's not exclusive. All right. Or it's a duration of time. So there's always going to be a time element. Like what I'm going to be asking buyers are like, hey, give me 90 days as an exclusive. I'm going to work my tail off for you. But at the end of 90 days, if you want to re-up with me, fantastic. I'm going to keep working for you. Or it's just like a listing presentation. You're giving me the exclusive right to sell your house for a time period. All right. And if they negotiate and say, okay, I'll give you 60 days, they're like, okay, but that you're going to get an exclusive. So that means that, you know, I'm going to go all the way out for these people, but I want that same kind of commitment back from them.
Good.
Okay, outstanding. Okay, guys, it is 8:51. If anyone has any additional questions for Mike, I suggest you call him and just blow his phone up all day long, and call him for the next week. No, but I would say if you guys, I would encourage you all to reach out to Mike, maybe do